The rain was tapping a gentle rhythm against the living room window, a quiet song that made our cozy house feel even safer. I was curled up in the big armchair, a half-finished mug of tea growing cool on the small table beside me. The only light came from the warm, yellow glow of a single lamp, which fell perfectly on the pages of the book my husband, Ethan, was reading. He was on the sofa, completely lost in his own world, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sight of him, so calm and present, filled me with a deep sense of peace. This was my life. Simple, quiet, and perfect. The sudden ring of my phone sliced through the silence, making me jump. I frowned, reaching for it. It was almost 10 o'clock. Who would be calling so late? The screen lit up with my sister's name, Tessa. A knot of worry tightened in my stomach. Tessa was an airline pilot. She flew long-haul flights, and her schedule was a mess of different time zones. A late-night call from her usually meant a layover in some faraway city, but something about this felt different. "Tessa, is everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't disturb Ethan. The line was quiet for a second, filled with a strange, staticky hum. Then her voice came through, but it wasn't her usual confident, breezy tone. It was a harsh, urgent whisper, like she was afraid of being overheard. "Ava, it's me." "I know. You sound strange. Where are you?" I asked, my worry deepening. "I'm in the cockpit. We're about to take off." I sat up straighter. "What? You're calling me from the cockpit? Tessa, are you allowed to do that?" "I don't have time, Ava," she snapped, her voice tight with stress. "I have a really weird question for you. Just answer me. Please." My heart started to beat a little faster. Tessa was the calm one, the one who handled emergencies at 30,000 feet without breaking a sweat. I had never heard her sound like this. "Okay," I said slowly. "What is it?" I could hear the faint sound of an announcement in the background before she spoke again, her whisper even lower now. "Is Ethan at home with you? Right now?" The question was so bizarre it almost made me laugh. I glanced across the room. Ethan was still there, a silhouette of peaceful domestic life against the lamplight. He turned a page, the soft rustle of paper the only sound in the room. "Yes, he's right here," I whispered back, a smile in my voice. "He's on the couch reading." "Why are you asking such a silly question?" The silence that followed was heavy and cold. It stretched for what felt like a full minute. I could feel the good mood in the room starting to curdle, like milk left out in the sundae. All the warmth seemed to drain away. When Tessa finally spoke, her voice was barely audible, a thread of pure ice that shot straight down my spine. "Impossible!" I clutched the phone tighter. "What do you mean, impossible?" "I'm looking right at him, Tessa." "No," she whispered, and this time her voice was shaking. "That is impossible. Ava, listen to me very carefully. He just boarded my flight to London. I saw him with my own two eyes. He walked right past the cockpit door, not 5 minutes ago." The world tilted. My brain felt like it was trying to solve a math problem with no right answer. My gaze was fixed on the man on the sofa, my husband. He had the same dark hair that always fell over his forehead. He was wearing the gray sweater I bought him for his birthday. He was real. He was here. "Tessa, that's crazy," I said, my own voice starting to tremble. "You must be tired. It's just someone who looks like him. It has to be." "It wasn't someone who looks like him," she insisted, her words sharp and certain. "It was him. He had that small scar above his left eyebrow. He was wearing the watch I got him for the wedding. It was Ethan. I'm telling you, it was him." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. Every logical part of my brain was screaming that my sister was mistaken, overworked, or playing some kind of horrible prank. But the terror in her voice was real. I stared at the man on the couch, my husband of 5 years, and for the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, wedged its way into my heart. He seemed so calm, so unaware of the conversation that was tearing my world apart. He lazily stretched his arms over his head, then settled back into his book. It was a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. I opened my mouth to tell Tessa she was wrong, to tell her to call me back when she landed, to tell her anything that would make this feeling go away. But before I could say a word, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A single, soft creak of a floorboard. Right behind me. My blood turned to ice. My body went completely rigid. The man on the sofa hadn't moved. He was still sitting there, bathed in the warm lamplight. If he was there, who was behind me? With a choked gasp still trapped in my throat, I slowly began to turn my head. My world wasn't always a cold, dark room with a monster hiding in the shadows. Just hours ago, my world was warm and bright, built on a foundation of love so solid I thought nothing could ever shake it. Our life was a quiet, happy song. Ethan was the melody, and I was the harmony. We fit together perfectly. We met 5 years ago at a local coffee shop. I was trying to shield my laptop from a sudden downpour, and he offered to share his much larger umbrella. He had a smile that could have melted a glacier, and eyes so kind they seemed to hold all the goodness in the world. He told me he was a freelance architect, a designer of beautiful spaces. It made sense. He had built such a beautiful space for us. Our house wasn't just a building, it was a home he had poured his heart into. Every corner held a memory. The kitchen was where we danced to old songs on the radio while making spaghetti, splashing sauce on each other like children. The small garden in the back was where he taught me how to plant roses, his hands gently guiding mine in the soft earth. He'd kiss the dirt off my nose and tell me I was the most beautiful flower he'd ever seen. He was my everything, my best friend, my partner, my safe place. But looking back now, through the fog of fear, I can see the cracks. They were tiny, almost invisible, like fine lines in a perfect vase. I had seen them, yes, but I had chosen to ignore them, to paint over them with the bright colors of my love and trust. Because when you're that happy, you don't go looking for reasons to break it. The first crack appeared about a year into our marriage. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of him thrashing beside me. His face was twisted in fear, and a single desperate word ripped from his throat, loud and clear in the silent room. Nathan! I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering. I shook him gently. Ethan, honey, wake up. You're having a nightmare. His eyes flew open, wide and panicked. For a split second, he looked at me as if I were a complete stranger, a look of such confusion and fear that it startled me. Then he blinked, and he was my Ethan again. Just a bad dream, he mumbled, pulling me into a hug and burying his face in my hair. Who's Nathan? I asked softly. He went still. No one, he said, his voice a little too firm. It's just a name. Go back to sleep, Ava. He never spoke of it again, and whenever I tried to bring it up, he would change the subject with a kiss or a joke, and I, foolishly, let him. Then there was the scar. It was a thin, white line on his forearm, faded with time. It looked old. One summer afternoon, as we were sitting by the lake, I traced it with my finger. You've never told me how you got this, I said. A shadow passed over his face. The cheerful light in his eyes dimmed. It's an old story, he said quietly, pulling his arm away. Not worth telling. He stood up and pulled me to my feet, suggesting we go for a swim. The moment was gone, the question left unanswered, floating away over the water. The biggest crack, the one I really should have paid attention to, was his past. It was a locked room, and I was never given the key. He had no family, not a single one. When I asked about his parents, he'd say they passed away when he was young. No siblings, no cousins, no crazy aunts or uncles to share funny stories about. His childhood was a blank page. We had wedding photos all over our house, pictures of my family, my bridesmaids, our friends. But on his side of the aisle, there was no one. Our home had no pictures of a younger Ethan, no awkward school photos or family vacation snapshots. It was a difficult childhood, he told me once, his voice soft with a sadness that made me want to hug him and never let go. My past isn't as bright as our future, Ava. Let's focus on that. And I did. I believed him. I loved him so much that I accepted the blank pages, the locked doors, the unanswered questions. I told myself that everyone has secrets, that his past was his own, and that all that mattered was the beautiful life we were building together. Our love was enough to fill in the empty spaces. Now, standing frozen in my own living room, the memory of his perfect love felt like a lie. The man on the couch, the man who had built this life with me, was an illusion. And the creaking floorboard behind me was the sound of my entire world breaking apart. My head snapped around so fast that a pain shot through my neck. The phone was still pressed to my ear, Tessa's frantic silence a buzzing insect in my head. And there he was. My husband Ethan was standing right behind my chair, not 3 feet away. He hadn't been on the sofa. Or had he moved so silently, so quickly, that I hadn't even noticed? My mind reeled. The man on the couch was gone. The man behind me was real. He looked down at me, and his face was a perfect mask of loving concern. "Ava? Honey, who are you talking to? You look like you've seen a ghost." My breath was trapped in my lungs. My fingers were numb around my phone. He took a step closer, his hand reaching for my shoulder, and I flinched away, a raw animal instinct taking over. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of hurt confusion. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice the same warm, gentle tone I had loved for 5 years. I scrambled to my feet, putting the armchair between us like a shield. "Tessa called," I stammered, the words feeling like sharp stones in my mouth. She said, "You're on her flight. To London." He didn't laugh. He didn't get angry. He just sighed, a soft, sad sound, and shook his head slowly. "Oh, honey, come on." He walked around the chair, his movements calm and non-threatening, and gently took my hands in his. His touch was warm and familiar, but all I could feel was a deep, chilling cold. "Listen to me," he said, his eyes looking directly into mine. "Tessa works so hard. All those long flights, the different time zones, it messes with your head. She's exhausted. She probably saw someone who looked a little like me, and her tired mind filled in the blanks. That's all." His explanation was so simple, so logical. It sounded exactly like something I would have said myself just 10 minutes ago. But the ice in Tessa's voice? "No," I whispered, pulling my hands away. "She was sure. She saw the scar on your eyebrow. She saw the watch she gave you for our wedding." He held up his wrist, showing me the silver watch with the dark blue face. "This watch? Lots of people have this watch. Ava." He then touched the tiny faint scar above his left eye. "And this? You can barely see it. It was probably just a trick of the light." He was talking to me like I was a frightened child, and a part of me, the part that loved him desperately, wanted to believe him. He saw the doubt warring on my face. He took another step closer, his expression softening into the one I knew so well, the one that always made me feel safe. "Do you remember our first date?" he asked softly. "You were so nervous you spilled coffee all down the front of your white shirt. You were about to cry, but then I made that stupid joke about modern art, and you laughed so hard you snorted. You turned bright red, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. My heart ached. How could anyone else know that? What about last night?" he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "When we were lying in bed, and you told me you'd found a picture of that little house by the sea, you want us to retire in one day? You told me you wanted a porch swing and a garden full of hydrangeas. You whispered it, Ava. No one else in the world heard that but me." Tears pricked my eyes. He was right. It was impossible. Tessa had to be wrong. She had to be. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. I felt foolish for ever doubting him. I let out a shaky breath and started to move toward him, ready to fall into his arms and apologize. But then his eyes flickered down to the phone I was still clutching in my hand, and his entire face changed. For just a fraction of a second, the warmth vanished, replaced by a flash of something hard and cold. It was like seeing a predator look at its prey. Before I could react, he moved. His hand shot out, not with the gentle touch of a lover, but with the sharp, quick motion of a thief. He snatched the phone from my grasp. "What are you doing?" I cried out, reaching for it. "I'm protecting you," he said, his voice suddenly firm, all the gentleness gone. "Protecting you from stress. No more confusing calls from your sister to upset you." And then, with a sharp, violent crack, he smashed my phone against the edge of the fireplace. The screen spiderwebbed into 1,000 pieces. The plastic casing splintered. He dropped the ruined device onto the floor, its light flickering one last time before dying completely. I stared at the broken phone, then back up at his face. The man smiling at me was not my husband. My husband would never do that. My husband would never look at me with such cold, calculating eyes. "There," he said, his smile returning, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. "All better." He placed a hand on the small of my back, his touch no longer comforting but controlling. "Let's sit down. Everything is going to be okay." He gently guided me to the sofa, but I wasn't moving on my own. I was a doll, just being pushed into place. The cozy living room was no longer a safe haven, it was a cage, and I was locked inside with a stranger who was wearing my husband's face. Silence. That was the first thing I noticed after the sound of my phone breaking. A deep, heavy silence that filled the room and pressed in on my ears. The man who looked like my husband, my Ethan, was watching me, his head tilted slightly, a placid smile on his face. He was waiting to see what I would do. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was a test. My life depended on how I answered. My survival instinct, an animal part of me I never knew existed, took over. I let out a shaky breath and forced a small, watery smile. "You're right," I whispered, looking at the wreckage of my phone on the floor. "I'm sorry. I'm being silly. Tessa is just tired, and I let her worry me." The relief that washed over his face was immediate and profound. It was like a switch had been flipped. The cold, hard stranger was gone, and my charming, loving husband was back. "Of course you were worried, honey," he said, his voice dripping with sympathy. He came forward and wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry I broke your phone. I can't stand to see you so upset." I leaned into his hug, my body stiff as a board. His embrace, which had always been my safest place in the world, now felt like the bars of a cage. I could feel his heart beating steadily against my cheek. It was calm, unbothered. While mine was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. I had to pretend. I had to play the part of the loving, trusting wife until I could figure out what to do. The next few hours were the longest of my life. We went through the motions of our nightly routine. He made me a cup of chamomile tea, telling me it would help me relax. He brushed a stray piece of hair from my face, his touch making my skin crawl. We went to bed, and I lay there in the dark, my back to him, pretending to be asleep. I listened to his slow, even breathing, and every breath he took felt like a threat. The house was no longer my home. It was his territory, and I was trapped in it. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, my sister knew something was terribly wrong. Tessa sat in a sterile airport hotel room during her layover, the city lights glittering coldly outside her window. She had tried calling me back a dozen times. Each call went straight to a dead, empty tone. The phone wasn't just off, it was disconnected, destroyed. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. Her mind, trained to run through emergency checklists under extreme pressure, kicked into gear. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She needed information. With swift, practiced clicks, she accessed the airline's secure network and pulled up the passenger manifest for her flight. She scrolled through the list of names, her heart pounding. And there it was, Seat 14B. The ticket had been booked under the name Times Nathan Asterisk. The name from the nightmare. Tessa felt a cold dread wash over her. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. Someone, this Nathan, had taken Ethan's place on the flight, while someone else, a terrifying copy, was in my house. But why? She knew she couldn't warn me directly. The man in the house would be watching me, listening to everything. He had isolated me. She had to find a way around him, a secret path that only I would understand. She paced the room, her mind racing, digging through years of shared memories, searching for a key. And then it hit her. My blog. The one I'd started years ago, Ava's Corner. A silly little online journal where I used to post about books and gardening. I hadn't written anything on it in almost 2 years, but it was still there, a forgotten relic of a simpler time. It was perfect. It was public, but obscure. He would never think to look there. Tessa logged on and found my last post, a review of a poetry book. She scrolled down to the comments section. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a message that, to anyone else, would look like meaningless spam. Back in my house, I finally heard the sound of the shower running in our bathroom. It was my chance. I slipped out of bed, my movements silent, and crept downstairs. I needed a link to the outside world. I needed help. My laptop. I opened it on the kitchen table. The sudden glow of the screen feeling like a beacon in the darkness. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. My first thought was to email Tessa, but what if he checked my email history? As my browser opened, a small notification popped up in the corner of the screen. A little number 1 next to the icon for my old blog. My brow furrowed. I hadn't seen a notification from that site in years. Probably just junk mail. I was about to close the tab, but something made me pause. I clicked on it. It was a new comment on my last post, left just 30 minutes ago. The username was T Pilot. My heart stopped. Tessa, I read the message, my eyes flying across the words. Asterisk, great post. Reminds me of that summer we spent hours finding the key to the treehouse box. I still have my key. Asterisk. Tears instantly flooded my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope. The treehouse box. It was our most sacred childhood secret. A dusty old wooden box we kept hidden in the attic of our family home, filled with our most precious treasures. We'd made a pact that it was for emergencies only, a place to leave secret messages for each other if we were ever in real trouble. After our parents sold the house, Tessa had taken some things, and I had taken others. I had taken the box. It was upstairs, in the back of the attic, buried under years of memories. Tessa's message wasn't a reminder. It was an instruction. It was a map. She had left something for me, something that would explain everything. I now had a mission. I looked towards the stairs, listening to the sound of the shower still running. I had to get to that box. The sound of the water running through the pipes upstairs was my starting pistol. I had a window, but I had no idea how small it was. 5 minutes? 10? It didn't matter. It was all the time I had. I closed the laptop, leaving Tessa's message glowing in my mind, a single point of light in an endless darkness. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to bolt out the front door and never look back. But I couldn't, not without the proof, not without knowing what Tessa had left for me. My feet felt like lead as I crept out of the kitchen. The house, once my sanctuary, had become a labyrinth of traps. Every floorboard threatened to betray me with a groan. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of watching eyes. The pull-down cord for the attic stairs was in the hallway, right at the bottom of the main staircase. It was the most open, the most exposed part of the house. I paused, my hand hovering over the cord, listening. The only sound was the steady drumming of the shower from the master bathroom. He was still in there. I pulled the cord. The ladder unfolded with a series of loud, clattering clicks that sounded like gunshots in the silent house. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Certain he would hear. I waited, counting the seconds, but the sound of the shower continued, unbroken. With a surge of desperate courage, I scrambled up the ladder, my bare feet clumsy on the wooden rungs. I didn't dare turn on the light. The faint moonlight filtering through the single small window would have to be enough. The attic was hot and smelled of dust and old paper. It was a graveyard of our shared life, or what I thought was our shared life. Cardboard boxes were stacked high, labeled in Ethan's neat architectural print. Christmas decorations, old photos, kitchen stuff. Seeing his handwriting, so familiar and precise, sent a shiver of revulsion through me. It was all part of the lie. The treehouse box was in the far corner, just where I'd left it years ago, tucked behind a box of my old college textbooks. It was a simple, dark wood chest with a rusty latch, a treasure box from a time when my biggest fear was a monster under the bed, not one sleeping in it. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the latch. It scraped open with a screech that made me wince. I lifted the lid, my breath held tight in my chest. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were the relics of my childhood. A collection of sea glass, a friendship bracelet Tessa had made me, a few silly notes passed in class. It was all exactly as I remembered. For a heart-stopping second, I thought I had misunderstood. But then I saw it. Tucked underneath everything, an object that absolutely did not belong. It was a small, worn leather photo album, the kind with a simple tie to keep it closed. It was old, the corners scuffed and the leather softened with age. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with secrets. I sat on the dusty floorboards, untied the leather strap, and opened it. The first page was a picture of 2 little boys, no older than 5 or 6, standing in a sunny backyard. They were identical. Same dark hair, same wide smile, same mischievous glint in their eyes. They had their arms slung around each other's shoulders, 2 perfect copies. I flipped the page. Another photo, the same 2 boys, a little older now, sitting on a bicycle built for 2. Page after page. It was the same story. 2 boys, growing up together, their lives captured in faded color. I recognized Ethan in every single picture. The way he smiled, the shape of his eyes. It was all him. But there were 2 of him. An identical twin. A brother he had never once mentioned. A brother who he claimed did not exist. My mind was spinning. Who was the other boy? Why had Ethan hidden this from me? My fingers shook as I turned to the very last page. It held a single, more recent photograph. It was of the two brothers as young men, probably in their early 20s. They stood in front of an old, ivy-covered university building. One of them was smiling at the camera. It was the warm, confident smile I had fallen in love with. The other one, standing beside him, looked more serious, more reserved. The man on Tessa's flight. Nathan. I pulled the photo from its plastic sleeve, and that's when I saw the writing on the back. The handwriting was messy, rushed, and yet I recognized it instantly. It was Ethan's. Or, I now realized, maybe it was Nathan's. The message was only a few short lines, but they shattered the last remaining pieces of my world. Asterisk, my name is Nathan. If you are reading this, my brother, Ethan has taken my place. He is dangerous. He has always wanted my life. Do not trust him. Asterisk, the album slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud. It was all true. The man downstairs, the man I had married, was an imposter. His name was Ethan. And my husband, my real husband, Nathan, was on a plane, flying away from me, trying to warn me. The man in my house was a liar, a stranger, a dangerous stranger. At that exact moment, the sound of the shower stopped. The silence that followed was absolute terrifying. And then I heard it. A soft, deliberate creak. The sound of a footstep on the bottom rung of the attic ladder. He was coming. Panic seized me, cold and absolute. He was on the ladder. My mind screamed at me to hide, to run, to disappear. With a surge of adrenaline, I shoved the photo album back into the wooden box, snapped the rusty latch shut, and pushed it deep behind the stack of textbooks, back into the shadows where it belonged. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my dusty hands, just as his head appeared at the top of the opening. Ava? Ethan's voice was soft, laced with a gentle concern that was more terrifying than any shout. What are you doing up here in the dark? I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to make my voice sound normal, casual, even a little annoyed. I couldn't sleep, I said, forcing a shaky laugh. I kept thinking about that old silver locket my grandmother gave me. I thought it might be in one of these boxes. It was a weak lie, the first thing that popped into my head, but it was all I had. He climbed the rest of the way into the attic, his eyes scanning the dusty space. His gaze was sharp, suspicious. He was searching for something out of place, a clue that would betray my terror. He took a step towards me, and I instinctively took a step back. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, annoyance, maybe even anger, but he quickly masked it with another one of his perfect, loving smiles. "You should have woken me up, honey," he said, his voice smooth as silk. We could have looked for it together. He reached out to touch my cheek, and I had to fight every muscle in my body not to recoil. I forced myself to lean into his touch for a fraction of a second before pulling away. "It's silly, I know. I'll look for it tomorrow," I said, trying to move past him towards the ladder. "It's getting cold up here." He didn't move. He stood there, blocking my only exit. "You've been acting strange ever since your sister called?" he said, his voice losing its gentle edge. It was flat now, probing. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice coming out a little too high-pitched. "Just tired." Her call was weird. It just threw me off, that's all. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine for the truth. I held his gaze, praying he couldn't see the hurricane of fear raging behind my eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded and stepped aside. "All right, let's go back to bed." As I descended the ladder, I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move. The dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. He knew I was lying, and I knew who he was. The house was no longer a home. It was a battleground, and the air was thick with a silent, undeclared war. The next few hours were a masterclass in deception. I pretended to fall back asleep. I made him breakfast, my hands shaking as I poured his coffee. Every smile was a lie, every kind word a carefully placed shield. He, in turn, never let me out of his sight. If I went to the bathroom, he would find a reason to be standing in the hallway when I came out. The charming mask was still in place, but underneath it, I could feel the monster watching, waiting. Miles away, in a brightly lit airport terminal in London, the real plan was taking shape. Tessa's plane had landed. As the passengers disembarked, she stood near the gate, her eyes scanning every face. Then she saw him. He looked exactly like the man in my house, but there was a deep anxiety in his eyes, a frantic worry that the imposter lacked. "Nathan?" she asked, her voice quiet. His head snapped towards her, his eyes widening in recognition. "You're Tessa, Ava's sister. We need to talk," she said, leading him away from the crowds to a quiet corner of the terminal. The story he told her was a nightmare. Ethan, his twin, had always been consumed by a dark, twisted jealousy. He had resented Nathan for everything, his successful career, his friends, and most of all, for me. Ethan had become increasingly unstable over the past year, culminating in this terrifying, meticulous plan. He had drugged Nathan, stolen his passport and his ticket, and boarded the flight, leaving him locked in his own apartment. Nathan had only managed to escape hours later, his first desperate act being to get to the airport, hoping to intercept the plane, to warn someone. "He's not just pretending to be me," Nathan said, his voice raw with fear. "He wants to erase me. He wants my life, and he will hurt anyone who gets in his way. We have to get Ava out of there." Together, they went straight to the authorities. It was a crazy, unbelievable story, but the terror in their eyes and the undeniable proof of the plane ticket and passenger list were enough. The police began to mobilize, coordinating with law enforcement back home. But it would take time Ava might not have. Tessa knew she had to send one more message, one final warning. She bought a cheap, untraceable burner phone from a vending machine in the airport. She still had my new cell number, the one I had just gotten with a recent phone plan upgrade, written down in her wallet. She prayed the imposter hadn't found the new phone I'd stored away in a drawer, still in its box. She typed a short, simple message, her heart pounding with every letter. She had to believe I would be ready. The hours crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. The sun rose, casting long, menacing shadows across the living room floor. He was a constant presence at my side, a smiling warden in my own home. His charm had become a weapon, every loving gesture a threat. I felt like a mouse being played with by a cat, the final violent pounce an inevitability. Then, a faint vibration came from the kitchen counter. My new phone, the one I had left in its box in the junk drawer, buzzed with a single, urgent pulse. He was in the living room, his back to me, pretending to read the morning paper. My heart leaped. This was it. My hands felt clumsy, my fingers like sausages. As I slid the drawer open, the screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. Just 5 words. 5 words that felt like a secret key, a declaration of war. Asterisk, they're coming. Be ready. Asterisk, Tessa. A wave of courage, fierce and bright, washed over me, extinguishing the fear. I was not alone anymore. An army was coming for me, but I had to get out. I had to create an opportunity. A moment of chaos big enough for me to escape. My eyes scanned the kitchen, searching for a weapon, a tool, anything. They landed on the stove, on the frying pan from breakfast, a greasy film of oil still shimmering in the bottom. An idea, wild and dangerous, sparked in my mind. "I'm going to make some more coffee," I announced, my voice surprisingly steady. He grunted in response, not looking up from his paper. I moved to the stove, my body a coiled spring. I turned the burner on, setting the heat to high. Then, I grabbed the dish towel hanging from the oven door. With my back to him, I waited. The oil in the pan began to smoke, the smell acrid and sharp. "Is something burning?" he asked, a note of irritation in his voice. "Just a little spill," I lied, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Now!" I dropped the dish towel into the sizzling pan. It burst into flames instantly, a whoosh of orange and yellow flame shooting towards the ceiling. The smoke alarm directly above the stove shrieked to life, a deafening, piercing scream that shattered the morning quiet. "What did you do?" he roared, jumping to his feet. "Fire!" I screamed, backing away, putting all the terror I truly felt into my voice. "The kitchen's on fire!" For a single, precious second, he was distracted. His eyes were on the flames, his mind calculating, assessing this new threat to his stolen life. That was my moment. I turned and ran. I bolted from the kitchen, through the dining room, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors. The front door was my only goal, my beacon of hope. I was halfway across the living room when he tackled me. His body slammed into mine, sending us both crashing to the floor. The air was knocked from my lungs in a painful gasp. He was terrifyingly strong. He rolled me over, his knee pressing hard into my chest, pinning me to the ground. The charming mask was completely gone now. The face staring down at me was one of pure, unadulterated rage. His eyes were cold, dead things. This was the real Ethan, the monster. "Did you really think you could get away from me?" he snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl. "I am a better husband than he ever was. I gave you everything. This is my life now, our life." His hand closed around my throat, squeezing. Black spots danced in my vision. I clawed at his hands, my nails scraping his skin, but it was like trying to fight a statue. He was going to kill me. Right here, in the perfect home he had built for us. And then, a sound even louder than the smoke alarm, the splintering crash of the front door being kicked in. It flew off its hinges, slamming against the wall. The living room was instantly flooded with police officers in heavy tactical gear, their weapons drawn, shouting commands that were a blur of noise. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. His grip on my throat loosened for just a second, and it was enough. I gasped for air, a ragged, desperate breath. Through the chaos of shouting men, I saw two figures standing in the doorway, framed by the morning light. Tessa, her face pale with terror and determination. And beside her, a man who looked exactly like the one on top of me, my husband, my Nathan. His face was a mask of horror and fury as he saw me pinned to the floor. The sight of his double seemed to break Ethan completely. A wild, primal scream of rage and defeat tore from his throat. The police swarmed him, dragging him off me. He fought like a cornered animal, kicking and screaming my name. His eyes locked on mine with a look of pure hatred. I scrambled backwards on the floor, crab-walking away from him, unable to take my eyes off the terrifying scene. The violent arrest of the man I had loved, the man who had worn my husband's face. Then, gentle hands were on me. I looked up into the same face, but these eyes were different. They were filled with tears, with relief, with a love so deep and real, it felt like coming home after a long and terrible journey. "Ava!" Nathan choked out, his voice breaking. He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I felt like my broken pieces might just press back together. I collapsed against him, burying my face in his chest, the sounds of the sirens, the shouting, and Ethan's final, desperate screams all fading into the background. I was safe. I was in the arms of my true husband. But as I closed my eyes, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the ghost of the man who had lived in my house would haunt me forever.